All right, well, good morning and welcome. So today's intent is to go through the Healthquest orientation presentation and resources that are available to you as practice facilitators. Before we go into the presentation, I do want to show you where these come from. So on the primary care tools and resources page, if you go to the practice facilitator page, there are a number of resources available to you here as practice facilitators when orienting a clinic to CPR. And in the engagement tools, there's an orientation presentation for each of the EMRs. Today we're going to go through the Healthquest one. And associated with that as well, there are some adjunct tools that are useful when going through this with a clinic. Later on, clinics will be using the user guides, but as well, there is the mapping tools. So I'm going to show you those. These are available. And when you're informing a clinic, depending on the stage that they're at, these tools become really helpful. So this is the guide for Healthquest. It's an amalgamation of tools. It does include mapping and information on getting ready for CPR. Then associated with that is a poster that is available. This prints really nicely on legal size paper or ledger size paper, and it describes the mapping. And going with that is a community encounter digest. So this CED, the fields on this actually match the poster so that you can make that connection between the fields that map on the from the EMR into the CED to the community encounter digest. So they work really well together. I'm going to go back to the presentation. So this is available for you to download. It is a PowerPoint, and in that case, you can actually use it as a PowerPoint. You can print the slides that you want. We do know that some primary care networks have their own introduction slides, so you might be using those rather than these slides. I'm just going to show you it in slide sorter mode so that I'll give you an orientation of what's here and the order that we'll go through it. So the first section is really the background information and the why. Then it moves into CII, CPR and what they are. Then specifically, how does it work for MicroQuest, Healthquest? Including the data mapping and other features. And then after the specific parts about Healthquest, it goes into participation readiness, what a physician might have to do versus being optional, readiness to move ahead, and then we actually have some PreGoLive tips specific to MicroQuest, Healthquest. So I'm going to take you through this presentation more about coaching you how to use it. And I also want to point out that each slide, you won't see it here, has notes on it. So these are meant to provide you with some background information so that you can customize the delivery to your PCN as well. And so they're available to you on each slide, and there are key messages. So in introducing CPR, at this point, we do remind physicians that the registry of CPR was at the request of the section of general practice, which is now called the section of family medicine, and Alberta Health made the commitment to build it. The functionality for community specialists to submit consult reports from their community EMR to Netcare was a resolution at the Alberta Medical Association Representative Forum, and it's been a long desired functionality for specialists to do that. This next section about the why, I am actually going to move into PowerPoint now, now that you can see that there are slide notes on each page. So why did we make this technology? Well, the main reason, as we've discussed, is continuity of care. And relational continuity is that foundational concept about that established relationship between a primary care provider, physician or nurse practitioner, and their team, and their patients, where there is that mutual agreement to provide them that care. And the relational continuity is that foundational concept that informs informational and management continuity so that we can have smooth transitions of care for patients in Alberta. This slide relates to the benefits, and the whole document associated with the benefits of relational continuity is available on the AMA Act website. The point being is there are, of course, clinical benefits to the patient, really importantly, health outcomes. But there's also benefits to the provider and team. And so whereas patients have improved satisfaction, so do providers and teams when they have high relational continuity. This slide, and you might customize this to your primary care network, relates to the fact that CII CPAR is in strong alignment with what PCNs are moving forward to achieve in respect to adopting the patient's medical home, which includes continuity of care, care coordination, which is one of those purple elements at the top, which relates to transitions of care, and also addictions and mental health. And we can make that connection. We found out that with e-notifications alerting primary providers when their patients are having day surgery is really informative for patients with a history of addictions and mental health, in which case the primary provider may wish to intervene and ensure that they are supporting the patient post-surgery when they could be taking painkillers. This slide is to relate to the clinical practice guideline, and the point that relational continuity was so important that the guideline program, which normally and usually produces guideline with respect to clinical things like cardiovascular health, etc., produced one for a clinical intervention of relational continuity. So now you transition to what are CII and CPAR. This gives you the definition of CII, describing it as that technology that is able to share information from community EMRs to Alberta Netcare. And this new piece of technology we call the Healthcare Data Repository. It's new in Alberta. Some physicians want to know more about that, and that's the purpose of this slide. The fact that the Healthcare Data Repository is not an ungoverned piece of technology. There is governance over that technology, and it's governed by the Health Information Data Governance Committee, and it has a clear purpose for quality improvement and health system planning. This is the definition of the technology of the Central Patient Attachment Registry. It is a separate piece of technology that works with CII, and this is the database that houses the relationship between primary providers and the patients on their panels. It is an automatic upload from the EMRs on a monthly basis, and for clinics that have been engaged in panel management, the logical next step, and we're going to see how it is very foundational to what is enabled and coming with CII CPAR with respect to e-notifications and other technology. So again, reminder, many tools available to the provider and team on the AMA Act website. And then how does CII CPAR technology work specifically for MicroQuest Healthquest? We're going to explain that there are 3 types of data that move from the clinic EMR to Alberta Netcare and the Healthcare Data Repository. The first one are simply encounters, and this is where it's really important that physician participants understand that it takes from dedicated data fields and moves it to Alberta Netcare, copying it to the healthcare data repository. It sits in a new folder in Netcare called Community Reports, and actually after Go Live Day, we do ask every clinic to look in here for the community encounter digest that the clinic saw on the very first day they were enabled. So here's our sample community encounter digest, and the important part here is to demonstrate to the interested providers of the mapping that occurs from the EMR to the community encounter digest. And the various sections are explained here. The first section is the encounter section, where it includes where, when, who the patient saw, the patient reason for encounter, and we'll show you where that pulls from, and the clinical assessment that the provider makes. Then there's the health concern history field, and this pulls from problems. Possible allergies, it's called that because they do not require to be confirmed. Measured observations, so this is blood pressure, height, weight, waist circumference. Immunizations, if they are delivered at the clinic and sent up, they get recorded here. And when a referral is initiated, it records the type of referral that is being requested. And this is important so that other providers in the system aren't requesting the same type of referral. And as you can see from the example here, it includes urology, cardiology, so it's the type of referral. There's a disclosure message at the bottom, very similar to what physicians should be familiar with from using Alberta Netcare. These are the data elements that have been chosen, and Alberta Health worked with the Canadian Institute for Health Information to choose these data elements. The green ones go to Netcare and the Healthcare Data Repository. The white ones go to the Healthcare Data Repository in the background, and the blue ones go to CPR and the Data Repository. So there are some conditions in Healthquest for an encounter to flow to the Community Encounter Digest. Of course, there's the registration and configuration part that has to be set up before any of this can occur. The patient has to have valid demographics. The patient chart is not confidential, and the appointment has to be marked as done. If the encounter is not marked as done, the information does not flow. So here's the first field showing the mapping. On the left are the provider details on where it pulls that from the EMR. And on the right-hand side are patient demographics. There is a legend at the bottom. So green shows that fields that are clinically configurable. Healthquest is the only EMR that does custom configuration, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. The orange ones go to Netcare, but you don't, they are sent but do not show in Netcare. This means they go to the Healthcare Data Repository, and yellow is demographics, and they're always sent. So here's the first field showing the configuration or the configuration options in Healthquest. The first one is reason for visit. It can pull from two fields, each of those fields or both. And on the left-hand side, you can see it can pull from the type field or in the notes section. And so the clinics have a choice of which fields they want to set it up as. On the right-hand side, observations fields would normally be pulling from a chart note. And this is where the clinic has some choice of which chart notes they want to set up to pull to the Community Encounter Digest. So MicroQuest books a session with each provider because we know that providers have their favorite chart notes, and they decide which ones are going to pull to inform the Community Encounter Digest. At this point, it's always really important to point out that any field that does not map does not get pulled into the Community Encounter Digest. So this is always the options, these white fields, where providers and team members can record information that they know is not going to leave the clinic. That's really quite important. Problems, again, there's a bit of configuration option here, but it usually pulls from the problem field. Medications and allergies pull from the medication tab. Vaccination will pull from a place where the clinic is entering vaccinations. Referrals will pull from the referral templates, usually a form. So again, I mentioned that MicroQuest offers their Healthquest customers that custom mapping session. And once eClinic has already filled out their confirmation of participation form, eHealth Support Services initiates a process with the vendor, and then MicroQuest contacts the clinic to set up that custom mapping session. So this is another illustration to show an interested provider and team how the mapping works. So it shows them all the different fields that can pull into the community encounter digest so that they can get that understanding. As well, those other documents that you have are the printable documents that a clinic might use to understand the mapping. As well, forms do pull to the healthcare data repository, and this demonstrates the mapping from those forms. Complementary documents that the clinic will need to use is the user guides. And to understand the confidentiality features, there are some options in MicroQuest, and it's really important that providers understand what their options are if they choose to document in a field that is mapped and want to use the masking features. You can mask on a chart note, on a problem, or on a form. And there is chart level masking also available in MicroQuest. So this illustrates the options that are available to the clinic. All right, so that's our first type, encounter information. The second type of information that can go to Netcare are consult reports. And any provider that receives requests for consults and writes a consult report that they would fax back to the requester can get submitted to Alberta Netcare. So we do have primary providers in Alberta submitting consult reports as well. And how do they do that? So once they create the consult report, simply there is a button called Set and Send to Netcare, really simple. And the consult letter has to be linked to a doctor that is configured to send to, or set up to send as well, has signed up for the process. And that linking is really important. There's also a feature that if a consult goes to Netcare and the provider wants to take it back, if it is still the same day that they sent, they can just click the unsend to Netcare, and actually that prevents anything from being sent that evening. If it is the next day or later, they'll click the same button and it will be removed from Netcare and replaced with this canceled message in Netcare so that others can see that it was canceled. And really importantly, the provider wants to see that it was canceled. And where do those consult reports sit in Netcare? They sit in the existing consultation folders, which most providers are quite familiar with. All right, so now we're on to the third type of information that can be sent from MicroQuest to the Central Patient Attachment Registry, and those are the panel lists. So they get uploaded on a monthly basis. There is a manual work that has to take place. I'll show you that. And once a month, those panel lists go from the EMR through the Data Hub to the Central Patient Attachment Registry. And this is where the clinics have two reports that are available for them in return. The demographic mismatch report that indicates any patient on their panel that has become deceased since the last monthly upload. And the other part that is demographic information that helps to keep the panel's demographic information quite neat at the clinic. The second report are the panel conflict reports, and this will indicate to the participating physician or nurse practitioner any patient on their panel that is on another participating physician or nurse practitioner's panel anywhere in Alberta, and it indicates the last date seen and the last date confirmed for both providers, and it gives some demographic information of the other provider. And this information is copied to the healthcare data repository as well. So for Healthquest clinics, they have until the 21st of the month to submit their panel, and I'll show you how that works. On the 22nd of the month, CPR starts to do that matching, and the demographic mismatch reports and an error report in CPR are available within 2 days of submission. And then the panel conflict reports are available on the 2nd of the month. And to get those, somebody at the clinic who's designated to be called now a CPR panel administrator logs into the confidential or the secure web portal that is CPR and is able to download those reports to the clinic EMR. Not to the clinic EMR, to the clinic desktop computer. So how it works in CPR is there is a new area that was added called CPR Reporting. And in that area, a clinic team member would need to go in and they can, one, view the panels of every participating provider, which is a really good quality improvement way to look and see what information is going to be uploaded. And here they can check that there is a verified date and a last visit date for each panel that uploads. And they're able to view these reports, they can retrieve them, put them into a spreadsheet for use there as well. Then once a month before the 21st of the month, one person at the clinic needs to go into this area and they can submit each panel for each provider that's registered by the submit panel button, or they can hit submit all panels and they all go with one click to the central patient attachment registry. So it's pretty easy for the MicroQuest Healthquest clinics to do this. So again, these are the visual representations of the reports that are available. It's important when explaining the panel conflict report that the other provider on the list is also a CPR provider, a CPR participant, and they want to resolve their conflicts as well. But this is where it represents the work that the clinic is doing as the last confirmation date, last visit date, and shares it with the conflicting provider. And I already mentioned the demographic mismatch report. Usually clinics are very pleased to see that there is a way that they can get information about deceased patients through this method, and they find this really useful. So this is the current future state of CPR, and whereas we do have e-notifications enabled in Healthquest, we've got some slides on that in a moment, that's really exciting, there is another functionality that is in development, actually two. One is the ability that the participating primary providers will be able to create what's called a patient summary report and upload that from the clinic EMR to Alberta NetCare. And this would most likely be done for a patient with more complex health needs, where it'd be really important to share that information with other providers in the patient circle of care, and a copy uploading to the My Health Records, which is a place where the patient can access that. But another feature, and this actually is really exciting, is that the requirements have started to be collected, and that's where the CPR primary provider will be identified in NetCare. So that's a really exciting time where the participants in CPR, the physicians, will display on their patient's NetCare record that they are the primary care provider from CPR. So e-notifications is what you'd like to explain next, and it is likely the highest value proposition for participating or interested providers. And this is your way that you can do that. So e-notifications are information that goes to the clinic on a daily basis, 7 days a week, 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. And it tells them when one of their CPR registered patients has had a hospital admission, a hospital discharge, an emergency visit discharge or day surgery. So the notification comes into the EMR in Healthquest. It comes into the lab result tab, and providers see it in their appointment list view, where they're normally looking at lab reports anyway. It was designed so that it can be teamwork, and team members with access to lab results can also see notifications. Importantly, they might need to use the date filters, which they might not be familiar with, to view them as well. So as I mentioned, they come in 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and importantly from any facility in Alberta. So if the provider is working, let's say in Edmonton, but the patient has an emergency department visit and discharge from Red Deer, they would see that. And once they open it up, they have access to the full summary of that information, which includes the patient demographics, the facility, location, and time that they visited and date. If it's entered at AHS, they get the attending provider, the admission reason, and if that patient is paneled to more than one provider in the Central Patient Attachment Registry, it identifies the additional providers notified, because at this time, the clinic may wish to address that panel conflict with the patient and who is going to follow up with the patient. At this point, I think we've gone over the key benefit to participating providers and teams, but this is an opportunity for you to outline the other benefits to the patient, PCN, and the system for participation. At this point, you'd want to go into the readiness criteria, but you probably have a good idea as you're working with the clinic, going over the 4 readiness criteria. And if this clinic is on Healthquest and on a local install, so they have their own server, they do need to make sure they're on the latest version before go live. Again, talking about they need to be live on Netcare. The privacy impact assessment needs to be up to date. You may need to spend some time discussing this. A new PIA is not what's required for participation, but whatever PIA the clinic has, it needs to be up to date. And this is an important time to mention as well, that if a person at the clinic, likely the clinic privacy officer, which could be the clinic manager, would do the PIA update self-assessment, which would give them an indication of what needs to be updated. And then eHealth Support Services will link to that information and meet with that clinic representative and do the PIA risk assessment before moving ahead with the process. And the PIA update self-assessment gives the clinic a good idea if they need to do a major or minor update, if any kind of updates required at all. And there are tools in this deck that provide information about privacy and security, and it indicates for you and the interested family physician and team what those documents are. And we find that in presenting the information, some offices are really interested in this. Some may be much less interested in going through this information. An important bit here is to mention that CII CPR is covered under the Health Information Act, much like Netcare, and it is not required for the interested and participating primary provider to have conversations with patients about it, but they are required to provide notice. And the project has provided a health collection notice template for that purpose. And the clinic is required to either post this poster or use this as a sample to create their own poster. They can also put this information on their website or on patient registration if they are a clinic that does some type of registration form. If there are ever questions, which we're finding out does not happen very often, there's a patient brochure. We've created a script for custodians and clinic teams. There is a patient FAQ if it comes down to those details, as well as a privacy and security FAQ. So these materials are all available. When it comes to those tools, Here's examples of what they look like: the custodian and team script, the patient brochure, and the patient FAQ. Next is your opportunity to discuss panel readiness with the provider and or the team. And you do want to mention that you will do a panel readiness check with them before moving ahead with the project. And this is the panel readiness checklist. And you do want them to have all boxes checked off. If they don't, this is the opportunity to work with them to become panel ready. At this point, you might be using this part of the deck to answer questions with physicians. What do they have to do to participate in this? And this gives a bit of an outline. On the left-hand side describes what physicians have to do. They have to understand the information about the mapping. They do need to make the decision, and they are required to sign some participation forms and the Alberta Health Privacy Impact Assessment endorsement letter. And that needs to be signed by either all custodians, or if they have a designated physician as a lead custodian in the clinic, that's the person that does that. Now, as individual physicians, they may not be involved in some of the activities on the right-hand side, which is identifying the site liaison. It's often the clinic manager that fills this role. And somebody needs to, in the clinic, needs to meet with eHealth about the PIA. That's often the privacy officer, maybe the clinic manager, but it could be the lead custodian. And the physician may or may not be involved in the meetings with the PCN facilitator as well. After go live, the provider is required to view their conflict reports and give feedback on the process with the clinic team that's working on that, receive those e-notifications, and work with the team to develop a process to respond to those e-notifications. After go live, the provider or somebody at the team, like I mentioned early, needs to go to Netcare and look at those community encounter digests to make sure there's that connection between the mapping and the display in Netcare. There is an evaluation that's optional for physicians, and the individual physicians might be involved in QI meetings at the practice as well with respect to new CII CPR processes. So at this point, these next set of slides, you might decide to use if you're getting to the point where the clinic is ready to sign a confirmation of participation form. And this describes what that process is for clinics with panels and for clinics without panels. These slides might be best used with the clinic manager or a physician that is taking a leadership role in the implementation. These are some tools that can help you to describe the confirmation of participation form and what it involves, as well as the roles and responsibilities that you'll be taking on behalf of the PCN as their guide, as well as the roles and responsibilities at the clinic. At this point as well, you might introduce the team toolkit to the clinic manager or site liaison person if they've already picked that person. And this describes, again, the process of filling out the confirmation of participation forms. And now here we have some specific pre-go-live tips for Healthquest. And this relates to the configuration process. It is done once. A person does need administrative privileges to do this. And it provides some guidance on configuring the doctor card for community information integration. So really simple step that will take place before go live as well. And again, introducing the team toolkit as a tool that's available, likely if anything used by the site liaison. And the clinic journey checklist is another tool that you might be working with the clinic site liaison, and describing that there are more resources available if you choose to use these. So I am going out of PowerPoint mode and showing you that this deck is available for you to customize and use, recognizing I just went through a lot of slides, and these are likely not going that you'd get enough time to do all this with a provider and team. but you'd likely get smaller snippets of time, and you can select and choose which ones you might want to use and how much time you're going to be spending on them. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but I am going to now pause the recording and see if we have any questions.